often have you felt restricted to spiritual practices that often seem outdated and of little relevance in today's world? Are you discouraged to express your own creative talents and develop spiritual practices that are uniquely you? The Liturgical Rebels podcast is for people like you who want to reimagine and reconstruct their faith and spiritual practices. It's for those who want to reshape belief and journey closer to God's wholeness with peace, justice, and flourishing, not just for themselves, but for the earth and all its inhabitants. In today's episode of Liturgical Rebels, I will be in conversation with Kevin Sweeney, author of The Cosmic Christ and Concrete Jesus, a book that I find quite intriguing. Kevin explains, in this book, I want you to feel what I mean when I write about the relationship between the cosmic Christ and the concrete Jesus. I want you to see how the power of the Big Bang and the presence of the boundary-breaking Jesus are the same. I want you to see that the universal source of love and the substance of liberation are one. I want you to see that the God who has no edges also takes sides in situations of injustice. And why are the mystics and the Black prophetic tradition my guides? Because in my own journey, the mystics gave me the cosmic Christ, and the Black prophetic tradition has given me the concrete Jesus. Kevin is also chaplain for hospice care in Honolulu, Hawaii. He lives there with his wife, Christine, and their two kids, True and Michaela. Kevin, it's a delight to have you on the Liturgical Rebels podcast today. Thank you for being a part of it.
Yeah, no, I'm super, super grateful to be here with you, Christine. And even though I'm doing my own podcast for years, which I don't do anymore, and being on a lot, I still don't take for granted the invites, the time, the energy, these conversations. So very grateful to be on with you. This is cool.
Well, it's a delight. And, reading your book and the information I have on you, you've been on quite a journey since you became a Christian. And I was intrigued by a lot of what I read. Firstly, about you walking across the stage at your graduation with James Cone's book, Black Theology and Black Power. And that was quite a radical step. And just intrigued by the journey from, much more conservative Christian perspective to obviously what many would consider a very progressive and radical Christian perspective. So can you share a little bit of that journey with us?
Yeah, well, so the story Christine's referring to, I tell somewhere in the book. I kind of forget what chapter right now. But I graduated from Fuller Theological Seminary in spring of 2012. And when I did, we're in our gowns, we're all happy. I did 3 years there. I didn't do an MDiv. I was like, I don't want to do that many languages. So I did 2 MAs while I was there. It basically meant I could take any classes I want because there was so much overlap. And when, I think Dr. Mao was still the president at the time. And, he calls my name, Kevin Sweeney. And even though prior to this, they said, no taking anything out of your gown and flashing, in my mind, I'm like, it's too late. I've been planning this for a while. And so when Dr. Mao calls my name across the stage, I took out a copy of James Cone's Black Theology and Black Power, held it out, and walked across the entire stage holding it so the crowd can see. And, Dr. Mao comes to shake my hand. I'm kind of smirking. I'm like, all right, thanks for everything. I just kind of moved on. But that was, why would a young white male walk across the stage at his seminary graduation holding a copy of a book from 1968 or 69, by the way, called Black Theology and Black Power? And at that point, and it was reflective of my whole experience at Fuller, I'm like, that book was a critique of the institutionalized white supremacy that had been embedded in that school since its inception, right? It was a challenge to the Eurocentricity that was invisibly flowing through the courses and the curriculum and resources that they deem central for Christian formation. And that isn't just Fuller, by the way. Fuller is a particular in a larger universal reality of theological education. And I had a great experience at Fuller. But that was my way of making that statement because the Black prophetic tradition had shaped me so profoundly. I said, this wasn't marginal for me. This wasn't peripheral. This wasn't an extra alternative or whatever you call it. This was central. And I argue these liberating voices should be central for everybody's Christian imagination and social imagination that flowing out of the life of Jesus. And I don't know if you know this part of my story. I tell it more in my first book, The Making of a Mystic, but I wasn't a church kid. I went to Catholic school for a little bit when I was young and then stopped going to mass. And my parents never shamed me, never coerced me. I'm very grateful for that. Right? I tell people I grew up with a pleasant indifference to religion.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't think about it. It wasn't bad. It wasn't good. There was no shame or guilt for me with God, but there wasn't any reverence. It just was a non-issue, essentially. Even though it's there in the atmosphere, it's unconscious. A lot of religion, I think, operates on an unconscious level. And I had an existential crisis at 17, in the midst of a lot of success in sports and music at a young age and kind of having everything I'm supposed to have. And I had this spontaneous awakening moment with God while I was on mushrooms at 18 years old. So there is this immediate, direct, transformative, spontaneous thing that happened between what I assumed was God at that time with no youth groups, no pastors. So from 18, I feel this pastoral calling. My stint in conservative evangelicalism, I think, lasted like 2 to 4 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was great. I went to a Foursquare Bible college and I learned historical grammatical interpretation and everything a conservative fundamentalist theological education would teach you. And I'm grateful for that. It was helpful. But for me, that was a large practice of what the Dalai Lama says. You have to learn the rules to creatively break them. That's what that was for me. And so by the time I went to Fuller and took my first Intro to Black Theology course, I was very in the emergent conversation. I was like 23 at the time, like emergent and deconstruction already
Uh-huh.
and epistemological search, like all that stuff. All the people we loved back then, were shaping me. I think they're saying everything comes from a perspective. There's no objectivity. There's no certainty epistemologically. I'm like, great, which means there's other voices, right, outside
Mm-hmm.
of these power structures, it was like opened a door. So when I started studying liberation theology, I was like, and here's the other voices that can help lead us to the future. That's kind of how that happened.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, I know. I had my upside down moment when I worked in the refugee camps on the Thai-Cambodian border. And boy, you just don't, in the conservative church, you just don't learn how
Mm,
to process these kinds
mm,
of experiences.
mm,
And it's a wonderful journey. I mean, you can either run from it, I think, and some
mm,
people do that and remain in that fundamentalist viewpoint, or
mhm.
you can embrace it and allow it to grow you. And I was just reading a book by Archbishop Rowan Williams, previous Archbishop, and he said that if we're not growing in our faith, we are stagnating and shrinking.
Mm,
And he talks
mm,
about having to think outside the box constantly in order
mm,
to continue to grow. And I think that's a great way to think about it. And
mm.
I think that's
Yeah.
what your book is going to do for a lot of people,
Oh,
is to
it's
help
great. I
them
appreciate
to
that.
think outside the box. So, um, yeah, I found your book, The Cosmic Christ and the Concrete Jesus, to be thought-provoking, provocative, and compelling in a lot of ways. It
Mm.
really is a challenging book, I think will be for many people. Even the name, The Cosmic Christ and the Concrete Jesus, is probably, whoa, for a lot of people. So what is your main purpose in writing this book?
Mm. Yeah, I love words. I love titles. I love aphorisms. That's just my wheelhouse creatively. So I love the title. And a part of it was my wife and I led a church from like 2013 to 2022 out here. I don't know if you know that, but we met you and your husband at one of the Tim's.
Eating habits. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that was like early on in the life of our church. Maybe it was like 2015. It was great.
I vaguely remember.
Yeah, we sat down
Yeah.
and we spoke for a little bit. And COVID complications, long story, but my wife and I decided to close the church down. Our last Sunday was May of 2022. So it's been almost, 3 years. And right around that time, I was walking. I'm in Hawaii right now. I'm 2 blocks from the water. It's an amazing area. And there's a park across the street. I was on a walk and I just had this thought come to me. I said, I want to write a book about Jesus. And for me, there was no like, what's my angle? It's just like, what do I really think right now? Like from this spontaneous awakening moment, this journey with not just the Christian mystics, but the perennial tradition of all mystics as a whole, the Black prophetic tradition, how it shaped me. I've gone through so many evolutionary stages of faith that give other people reason to not call themselves a Christian when they go through these critiques. I'm like, why is it so natural for me to be a Christian? And the book really comes out of that. It comes out of that experience. And I think a couple thoughts on that, like why I still call myself a Christian and why I still am, is from my initial awakening, faith was not based on beliefs
Mm,
for me. It was based on embodiment and experience.
mhm,
That spontaneous awakening moment was not doctrinal. No one taught me anything. There was no sinner's prayer. There was no dogma. It was just direct. It was my own existential journey and a direct encounter with this transformative, loving center of everything that changed my life. And to this day is always a response to that. Um, so I think as beliefs about God and Jesus would change for me over the years, my place in the experiential center of Christ always remained unmoved and was expanding and getting more spacious and being more free. So I think it's my awareness that what's been commonly called deconstruction the past, say, 5 to 7 years, since that's been more in the zeitgeist for Christians in the publishing industry. My perspective is that's simply a movement from one stage of consciousness to the
mhm,
next, or a
mhm.
movement from one stage of
It
faith,
should
right? So,
be. It should be
yeah,
at least.
I
Yes.
think in that moment, it feels so traumatic because, like you in Thailand and Cambodia, or me when I'm young, reading all this emergent stuff, blowing my mind when I'm at a conservative Bible college. That first step is so major because it's the first
Mhm,
time you're outside of your belief system, reflecting on your belief system as a belief system. Before it was just glasses you were looking through. Now you're outside of yourself looking at them. That is hard. It's challenging, right?
yes.
Um, because like those stages it's Fowler's movement from 3 to 4. If you're familiar with spiral dynamics, it's blue to orange or green. Like there's many different ways to map that movement. So I'm like, oh, these are, after a while, like these are movements through stages. That's natural. That's organic. That's how the universe works and expands, just through this evolutionary process. And it should be the same for us. And so one thing I've noticed, and feel free to push back and comment on this if you see otherwise, but I think sometimes I think, why does some of my writing feel different to me than when I read or listen to other like people, spiritual writers, not just Christians? And I say, I think most people write what they're learning. They're at the
Mhm,
current edge of growth. That's what they're focused on. So that
mhm.
makes sense. Most people write what they're learning. I write what I've become. I
Interesting
don't write
thought.
what I'm learning in the moment. Whatever I'm learning, you might hear me talk about 5 to 7 years later. You know,
Mhm,
I write what I've become and have embodied. So this book is not just a clever title. It's not just intriguing or provocative. The cosmic Christ and that direct experience, the liberating Jesus through the Black prophetic tradition, this is how I have oriented and made sense of my life as a
mhm.
Christian. So it's really just like, this is how I see. This is who shaped me. And I think you don't have to do this path, but this path is an invitation to a further path for everybody.
That's an interesting thought. Part of what's kind of going through my mind as you're saying that is I didn't really grow up in the church. I actually grew up between the Presbyterian and the Greek Orthodox Church,
Mm.
and then got involved with the charismatic movement. So,
Yeah.
you
they got
know,
they got both of us.
yeah, and um, so very early on in my faith experience, I learnt more of an embodied faith.
Mm,
And I wonder, if those of us that kind of grow up on the edges of the church are more drawn to that embodied faith in a way
mm,
that kind of transforms who we become rather
exactly.
than what we believe. Because I would say,
Exactly.
as you're saying, some of what you're saying, I think, yeah, that's some of what I've experienced
Yeah.
too. Because I continue to grow, but more through what I experience
Mm,
than necessarily, though, a lot of learning. I'm an
sure.
avid reader, so that's not kind of I don't not learn from reading,
Right, right,
but
right.
yeah, but it's an interesting thought to think about. So,
Yeah.
something I'd love to hear from some of our listeners, what they might think about that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. It's an interesting
Now,
observation.
getting down to a few kind of definitions, though, what do you mean by the cosmic Christ? Because that's a term that I suspect a lot of our listeners probably haven't heard before.
Mm, mm. Yeah, the biblical writers speak of that which is embedded within everything,
Mhm,
filling the entire universe, existing before all things, holding all things together, like Colossians 1 says. I think beginning in the very beginning with the Big Bang, through atoms and molecules and cells and simple organisms to human beings to cultural creation to the formation of communities, how this world and how our world has expanded, there's been a hidden evolutionary force, and I believe a benevolent force at work in this sacred process, right? The cosmic Christ has been unfolding in and through and as that term might be a problem for some people as the universe from the very beginning. So some of the ways to first get at the idea is like the cosmic Christ is the creative drive of
mhm,
evolution itself. It's the organizing principle within all forms of complexity. It's the transcendent power that's also immanent within the unity of life itself. Christ is that which holds all things together,
mhm,
draws humanity forward, fills everything, and remains the universal drive that guides our own individual evolution and the evolution of the universe itself. And there's times in life, I write about this in the book, where people in our traditions and then within the broader Christian tradition would say things and use the name Jesus. And I would kind of laugh to myself and it would make me uncomfortable. And I would think, that doesn't make sense to me right there. They would just say a prayer and be like, Jesus, we just want to thank you for today. And I would say, huh, Jesus? Like, so Jesus is responsible for this day. Jesus of Nazareth, the one who was crucified and rose and died. How is he responsible for the day? Was in Genesis 1 when all things were created, which, for me is poetic language. But do you imagine a 33-year-old Jesus speaking at that time before he was ever a human? Like, if you were to say creator or spirit or God, thank you for the day, wonderful. But Jesus, I would be like, I don't think that works right there.
mm,
Or you
mm,
watch a sunset, I experienced Jesus here. What do you mean you experienced Jesus? I'm going to get away with Jesus today of Nazareth, like, well, you're just going to go have a cup of coffee. And I get what people are saying, they're communing with God, but there is this force that holds all things together, animates all things, loves everybody at all times, universally, equally, that is holding all. Well, I think there's a better name for that. I don't think we can call that Jesus.
mhm,
I just don't think that makes any sense within the inner logic of the Bible and our Christian formation. I just don't. And I think the cosmic Christ is a name that mystics have used. I
mhm.
think Paul and people like that are the preeminent starting to think like that about
Yes.
the cosmic Christ. And for me, when I think about the incarnation, that for me, that's everything, like in this, like Rohr would talk about, the incarnation is Christian's trump card. For him, he's like, for the mystics and the Franciscans, Christmas is already Easter
Mhm,
in the sense of like, it's all already there. Right. And I love
mhm,
that. Creation is the first incarnation.
mhm,
For
mhm,
me, creation is a cosmic Christmas.
mhm,
It's all born right there. And I think what I love about the mystics is the mystics look at the confessional doctrine of incarnation, like spirit and matter as one, divine, human as one? And they say, yes, the fullness of incarnation is true in Jesus. And the mystics look at the rest of the world and say, and also out here.
Yes, yes.
That which was true in Jesus is also true everywhere else. And so I think that which was happening in and through Jesus is happening in and through our created world at all times. And the name of the unity of all of that is not Jesus. It's we would say it's the cosmic Christ
Cosmic
or the
Christ.
Christ. So that's kind of how I first get at that.
Well, and that is very much in keeping with the concept that God doesn't just speak to us through the Bible, that God speaks to us through, some say through the small book of the Bible and through the big book of creation. And I think more and more people are coming to realize that at the moment, that we can't kind of just read the Bible without also reading the book of creation and sensing the presence of God and the presence of the cosmic Christ that is in everything that we see around us and everything that we're involved with, which is,
Absolutely,
to me, is so much more profound.
It's the best thing. I'm like, who wouldn't want this?
Who wants to restrict themselves to the Bible, when you can have all of this as well? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a funny thing because I would laugh sometimes embracing a pastoral role that I had, just because of who I am and how that worked. And I'd say, well, if I can't watch, and I would name some dumb stoner comedy that I like if I can't like this and be a pastor, this won't work. Right? I had my own laughable versions of that. But what's funny was, in 10 years or so of pastoral of the role I had in the church, I pretty much never read the Bible devotionally. That just wasn't my practice. It didn't make sense to me because like you mentioned it earlier of like transforming who we are and changing our beliefs about God. Ken Wilber would talk about the difference between spiritual intelligence and spiritual experience. Intelligence, we're growing, evolving in how we see reality and God. That's a good thing. More inclusive, more free, more complexity. We should be doing that. But spiritual experience is not about seeing things differently. It's the very eye that is doing the seeing, that is being transformed. And so the direct experience of God, like I didn't get that from the Bible. I would just be like, this isn't like contemplation. I'm like, this isn't me being fully present to God in a contemplative way. This is gathering more information. And that doesn't mean I don't think scripture can ever lead to that. I think you can engage with it in transformative ways. But for me, I'm like, it's always been just direct silence has been my primary practice. So I was like, that just doesn't make sense to me. And what matters more, me learning more details about this Bible story right now, or me coming to the presence of God, confessing, weeping, saying things out loud, allowing God to heal me so I can be more present as a pastor? Which one's more important? That's the real work. That's what the point is, So yeah, it's out there and it's in here, it's the sacred text of creation. And I would argue reading the sacred text of our own lives and our own hearts as well.
Well, and if all we say is, and don't get me wrong here, I think that believing in Jesus is important as a beginning place. But
Exactly.
if that's all we can say after we've been Christians for years, there's something wrong, because God does call us to action. Just in so many different ways. And if we're not involved in the actions that God calls us to, then there's something very wrong. And I presume in a lot of ways, that's what you mean by the concrete the concrete Jesus is what we see Jesus doing and how Jesus calls us to be involved.
Totally. Yeah. Having the structure, like beliefs are like a spark that get the fire going. That's very valuable. But 10 years later, the spark isn't the point, the fire is, and to keep it going, and also where you're taking the fire in the world. And having the structure of Christian belief, right? You believe Christian things. You can agree to the confession and say the creeds. Okay. But having the structure of Christian belief without the substance of liberation or compassion or whatever it is that we believe the Spirit's doing in the world is like having a well-manufactured container without anything in it.
Yep.
Like believing in the abstract Jesus of faith, and I mean it when I say it, the Jesus of the creeds is an abstract Jesus. It's a metaphysical Jesus that requires nothing from you in an embodied way. I talk more about that in the book. So
Yes.
when you believe in the abstract Jesus of faith without a commitment to the liberating Jesus of the Gospels, or the concrete Jesus, like I call him, it's like having a plan for a battle without ever daring to step on a battlefield.
Hmm.
Right? It's a
Hmm.
body with no heart. I could go
Yeah.
on and on and on with metaphors. And the container is helpful insofar as it's holding the substance. The substance is, yes, your direct experience on a transformative level, but it's also that which the Spirit and the concrete Jesus is calling you into when it comes to concrete, tangible, new creation, loving work in the
Hmm.
world. So
Hmm.
that's the point. That's the way of Jesus.
Hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned the creeds. Let's talk a little bit about the creeds, because you mention very provocatively both the Nicene and the Apostles' Creed, and you say nowhere in the creeds do we encounter any reference to love, justice, and liberation. If our identity documents say nothing definitive about the earthly and embodied life of Jesus, then they say nothing about defining our embodied life as well. The creeds only speak of our beliefs and say nothing about embodiment. I thought that was a very powerful and important statement,
Mm,
which I totally agree with.
mm,
Because having I mean, I can say both the Nicene and the Apostles' Creed by heart, but that
mm,
doesn't necessarily mean that I live any differently. And it's only when I really enter into the embodiment of those that isn't explicitly mentioned there, that things start to change. So I
mm.
suppose what I'm saying is, uh, what
Yeah,
do you think?
why are you coming at the creeds? Why are you saying this?
What yeah, but in a way, I'd say, what should be the definitive document
Mm,
of
mm,
our faith? What do
mm.
you think should be? I have my idea, but what do you think?
At first, so my first thoughts before I attempt to come up with an answer for that question of what should be,
Sorry, it's
um,
a small question that I didn't kind of prepare you
yeah,
for.
no, that's fine. I'll say something about the creeds and then I'll answer that. We can be my first real critique on this particular way of seeing and seeing the creeds. Kelly Brown Douglas, womanist theologian, I think she's like the dean of she might be the dean of Union right now, actually, something like that. Great writer. Probably her and Cone and some of the original kind of early wave Black womanist theologians shaped my understanding of Jesus, probably more than anybody. And in her book, I think The Black Christ, or What's Faith Got to Do with It, those are her first two books, I believe. She starts critiquing the creeds. And I'm like, oh, okay, this is interesting. And gosh, it just made so much sense what she was saying. And what I take from her is we can be completely indifferent to oppression and utterly unconcerned with inequality and still reap the psychological benefits of being an Orthodox Christian, right?
Hmm.
As agreeing
Yes.
to the creeds as the way to do that. And so what I get from her and what I continue to say is the abstract nature of the creeds. Like the abstract meaning, do you believe in this? It's an abstract belief about
Hmm.
God, the Trinity, or the metaphysical view of the incarnation, right? Here's confessional doctrinal beliefs, right? They're all abstract. They say nothing about our embodied life or Jesus's earthly life at all. And so I say the abstract nature of the creeds leads to this profound disconnect between our beliefs and our bodies, between religion and love, and between being a Christian and following Jesus. Right. And Kelly Brown Douglas, writing in the context of the United States, says, with salvation guaranteed through belief, like somebody agreeing with the creeds, white people could be slaveholders and
Hmm.
Christians without
Yes.
guilt or fear about the state of their soul, because the creeds don't require anything from you when it comes to seeing your neighbor a certain way, including people who are different, etc. So I'm like, you can still be indifferent to oppression, the suffering of Black people in our country, and believe in the creeds. You can
Yes.
be antagonistic and violent towards LGBTQ plus people and believe in the creeds. You can pledge allegiance to white Christian nationalism, like sadly you and I are seeing every single day of our
Yes.
lives right now, and still believe in the creeds and believe somehow Christ is blessing that. So my critique of the creeds is that, it's
Hmm.
not that they're bad. They're just not, they're in a philosophical term, it would be, it is when people talk about things are sufficient but not enough, like it's sufficient to be a Christian in a confessional setting, but it's not enough to follow Jesus. And from
Hmm.
my perspective. And so those are limited. Beliefs are not, abstract beliefs about God are not bad, but they are limited. They are a starting point. They are holding together a container. And I personally think the value of the creeds historically in the global and historical church is like the creeds and these beliefs are like riverbanks that hold together this spirit, this water spirit flowing forward. We're all in our different boats flowing through it through church history. Hey, that's really helpful because to hold together a global community,
Hmm.
these are some things that hold us together. Great. That's cool. I'm not against that. I think that's good for the unity, but don't mistake them. Don't think they're more than what they are. They're not.
Yes. Yeah.
They're not doing that. So, identity documents in terms of what it means to be a Christian, I have no idea, but
I,
I
I, I suppose part of why I'm asking this is I've been studying the Sermon on the Mount during
gotcha.
Lent this year. And to me, that is so much
Mm,
more.
mm,
I mean, it's funny because, people have been wanting the 10 Commandments in church, in schools and things. And
right.
it's the same kind of thing like the creeds. They
Yeah.
don't really demand anything from the average person.
Mm,
Whereas the Sermon on the Mount, nobody wants that in their schools and in their
mm,
public buildings because boy, does that demand a lot of
mm,
who we
mm,
are and what we do.
mm,
And, of course, it was so central to all of what Jesus did, I feel.
mm.
So to
No, I like
me, in
that.
many ways,
I'll
that
take
was,
I'll take that. Yeah, that's great.
yeah. And
Yeah.
that in a way comes out of what I've been studying over the last
Mm,
few
I
weeks and
like
being
that.
very challenged by in terms of,
Mm,
wow, what else is God asking of me? What else is God asking of
yeah.
us as
Yeah.
followers of Jesus? And that,
Yeah, that's great.
yeah, as you say, the creeds don't ask, and that a lot of churches don't ask of people too.
Yeah.
So it's a challenging thing to think
Mm,
about. So
mm,
I am intrigued by the fact that both the black prophetic tradition and the mystics have been two of your guides.
mm,
Can you flesh that out a bit more? You've talked a bit more about the Black prophetic
mm,
tradition, but not really about the mystics. And
mm.
it's interesting those two kind of traditions that, in some ways, are in a bit of tension. I would say.
Absolutely. Yeah. When I first, I have this profound, direct, embodied experience of God that was truly immediately transformative, like really rewiring my consciousness,
Mhm.
realtering my life. And then I come into a Bible college and I'm learning fundamental, like evangelical theology. I was probably 22-ish, I believe, maybe 23. And I read a book called Everything Belongs, right, by Richard
Mhm.
Rohr. And when I heard him, I was like, this is like being in a foreign land and hearing a native tongue. And I'm like, there's no other writer they've given to me, and they didn't give me him. Trust me, I found him on my own. But I'm like, oh, he sees what I've seen.
Mhm.
Oh, he knows what I know, and he's further on the journey than me. But he's naming this movement where it's not beliefs, it's direct experience,
Mhm.
and then all of the fruit and wisdom and awareness that comes from being in that flow. And since then, for the mystic, God is no longer something you believe in with your life, because God is something you experience as and in and through your life.
Mhm.
It's a
Yes.
very different experience.
Mhm. Mhm.
So when I look at the mystics, I'm like, man, I can say so many things, but the mystics can embody pure acceptance of that which is right now in any moment. That is a mark of a mystic. The mystic is the one who knows that death is the key to life.
Mhm.
right? The mystic doesn't hold on to anything. We're talking about beliefs, right? Or plans or anything. The mystic doesn't hold on to anything too tightly because experientially they trust they are being held by
Mhm.
everything. You don't have to hold on to anything that tight, right? The mystic, and I love pastorally and think about how all this shaped me, as a pastor too, to lead a congregation. I'm like, the mystic is the one who will gladly give you the keys to a gate that they know doesn't even exist.
Wow.
But you need them right now.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
That's developmental wisdom of people to say, hey, you don't actually need keys to the gate because this is a gate. God is that gateless gate. But right now in your development, you need to believe I'm giving you keys to do this in order to do it. And I will offer those to you. But in the end, you'll discover they were never even there in the first place. And so when I read the mystics, I hear extremely serious people who are also very playful.
Mhm.
And not just Christians, we could think about great Christian mystics, Julian of Norwich, of course, Thomas Merton, people historically, contemporary ones you see like through the CAC, Finley and Rohr and Cynthia Bourgeot. And I also think people like Mirabai Starr as an inner spiritual teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh and the Dalai Lama. And look in the 60s and people love Alan Watts or Ram Dass. There's a whole, and historically, there's a perennial tradition of all of these mystics. And when I see them, I see myself.
Mm.
When I hear them, I hear the longings of my own heart. I hear my own connections that I've made. And the mystics take life almost uncomfortably seriously and yet not seriously at all. Like we laugh in the face of death because we've wept through thousands of our own funerals along the way.
Mm.
And we keep trusting that's the key to the future.
Mhm.
And like
Mhm.
mystics are always tiptoeing on the edge of heresy, dancing on top of the tables of
Yeah.
orthodoxy, and laughing at the walls that insecure religious people keep on building again and again. So the mystics have a playfulness of trusting. When I talk about the cosmic Christ, like there is a benevolent, loving, engaged, living reality that is for us and with us, and that somehow allows us to be present in any moment, take a few deep breaths, and say, somehow everything's okay.
Mhm.
The liberating Jesus then comes along and whispers, but everything's not okay. And those are both simultaneously true as a
Yes.
paradox for the
Yes.
Christian.
The
And
the
so,
need to constantly grow and to change and to recognize that God will always be much bigger than
mm,
we could ever think that
mm,
God is. That's one of the things that I say, that the longer I've been a Christian, uh, the smaller I realize my understanding of God is, and the bigger I recognize that God is. And
mm,
that's the way it should be. If
exactly.
God is who we say God is, surely we can't ever expect to really understand God.
Mm. And
Uh,
and yeah, and to reverse some of the Western rational orientation towards epistemology and learning as of understanding and mastery,
mm,
which I believe places the ego in control once again. And there's nothing wrong with obviously getting an education, but for the mystic, knowing is not primarily knowing God; it's being known by God. It's
yes.
not seeing God. There's kind of nothing to see. But it's the experience of being seen. It's not loving. It's actually being loved by God, which all of those render you out of control. They render you undone, and they actually require you to be open for the sake of an incoming as opposed to gaining mastery over something. And I told this story in my first book that I love. I was like 24. I was going through a walk in my neighborhood. I lived in Orange County, California at the time. My wife and I had moved there when we got married, and I was smoking like a Black and Mild, which is a super cheap cigar. It was like nostalgic for me as a kid, basically. So I was going on this contemplative walk at nighttime, just smoking this little cigar, just nowhere to go, not doing anything, just present. And then all of a sudden, there was like this little dialogue that happened within me, right? A little diatribe where I said, it's one of those moments where you just know. And the second voice says, know what? And then the first voice says, I don't know, but you just do. That captures what a lot of mystics are saying. Do you know? Yes. What do you know? I'm not sure. because it isn't an epistemological knowing of concepts and beliefs. It is an experiential knowing of that which is connected and with us at all times. And it's just a different mode of knowing. And the mystics have always offered that to me, named that for me, and invited me further into that.
Lovely.
And their vision of the cosmic force, the cosmic face of God that sees all of us with a loving gaze, I believe, is very true. And I think it's such a big part of the good news.
Oh, it is. It is. I mean, the world, the cosmos was created in goodness, not, kind of the sinful way that we've been kind of taught to look at it. How do you live out the principles that you're talking about here? What effect does it have on your life? I know you're a hospice chaplain, and I'm sure that, it impacts that. But just generally speaking, how do you live it out?
Yeah, I think the big thing from that first experience was, Thomas Keating, the great centering prayer teacher, talks about programs for happiness, which are like the three main ways he says the ego goes about, getting value for itself. Like one's like power and control, one's like affection and esteem, the other one's like security and something else. I'm an affection and esteem person.
Mm.
It means when I was young, playing sports, trying to play sports in college and doing music, my whole life was I need other people to see me. Because to see me is to praise me or affirm me, and to affirm me is to give me a sense of value. So my ego was so desperate to be accepted, desperate to be praised, desperate to be seen as special, that I gave my life to that when I was young. And I had my own existential crisis. That was a part of it when I was a teenager of like, why am I doing this? Do I love this? Do I love basketball? Or does a part of me just need this because that's what makes other people tell me I'm special? That was really what began my journey. And I say that because all the practical ways of the Christ and the cosmic Christ loving and seeing us, like how does it change us? Well, if that's true, if I'm seen by God, I don't need to be seen by you anymore. You know how freeing that is? Because I spent my whole life trying to get other people to see me. So at 18, when I feel seen directly by God, man, like that changed my life, because so to me, I'm like, I can fail. What does the Christ mean love? It means I can fail and I'm okay. It means I can make mistakes and take ownership of them because they don't change my value. It means I can like think about pastoring and everything you go through in organizations. I'm like, I can allow other people to unfairly criticize me without feeling the need to defend myself all the time like the ego wants to do. I don't always have to control my PR. That's everything. I can just let other people be. I don't need them to be a particular way in order for me to be at peace with who I am. Like that is the most liberating practice. To truly trust that you are seen changes everything because I don't need to be seen by others in a particular way. That is a tremendous amount of freedom. So I think on a personal transformative level, on an awakening level, it's a lot of that. And then on a practical level, a part of one thing I say in the intro to the book is I think you can be totally committed to the way of Jesus regardless of your beliefs about God.
Yeah, I
Because
agree. Yeah.
to experience love directly from God, you don't have to confess to the creeds. And then to follow Jesus, for me to have compassion on my neighbor, I don't have to confess. And I'm not saying I'm just making the creeds as an example of this is usually what it means to be a Christian is to believe. I don't really care that much about the creeds, to be honest, or whatever your doctrine of thing is at church. I'm like, well, you don't have to have those beliefs to have compassion on your neighbor. You don't have to have those beliefs to care for that person who's hurting. You don't have to have those beliefs to be committed to liberation. So like, someone says, I'm not sure what I believe, I'm deconstructing. A part of me is like, dude, who cares? Because you can directly, you can experience your true self in Christ and experience unconditional love and grace, no matter what you believe. And you can also commit to do the Jesus journey and love others, no matter what you believe.
Yeah.
What are we talking about? Because to me, a part of the future is a faith beyond belief and a faith. Like I tell people, I'm not trying to devalue beliefs, but I am trying to dethrone them.
Yeah. No,
This
no,
is not
I
what it
think it's,
means to be a Christian.
yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the life. It's what we're experiencing, the love, the community, and then the life we have. That's the
And look,
within your own awareness and being. That's what this is about.
Yep. Very good. Very good. Well, I think we're about coming to the end here.
No, I signed a contract for an hour and a half. I'm not
Fair
getting off this
enough.
early.
Is there something else you would like to say to people before we finish here?
I just think that, life's fascinating because it just keeps going. It just keeps going. And
I would agree, and I'm a lot older than you are.
yeah, and that's amazing. And I love that. And that's further evidence of, what I hope to continue to trust with my own life. And I think a part of this book is, hey, like, after the anger, after the rage, after the deconstruction, after the beliefs, but based on beliefs, I don't really care where people end up all the time. But after all that, life continues.
Mm-hmm.
Love is still present. The world is still worth fighting for.
Mm-hmm.
You still have things to create and contribute. So my life is always, I think there's an inner space, the spaciousness of Christ allows an inner spaciousness within us to keep opening up further and further. That means we're more free. And the liberating Jesus keeps inviting us to have the courage to keep caring, loving, and opening our hearts for the sake of others. There's no better news than that for me, ever.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Kevin, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
I would say
besides purchasing your book.
You feel me? That's if you want to follow the concrete Jesus to Amazon to get this book, man, that would be awesome. My website, kevinsweeneynow.com, books and happenings that I might be involved in. Although I am consciously, it's ironic, I'm doing a bunch of promo for the book right now, but I have made a conscious step away from public Christianity in some ways this year. And especially after this book comes out and this movement towards hospice and just where I'm at. I'm most active on Instagram at Kevin Sweeney Now. My other Instagram got deleted last year, which was honestly a big bummer. Yeah. But that's at this point, that's mostly me and my family at the beach or my son playing basketball. He's 6 and he's obsessed with it, which I love because it's that I left that part of me so long ago and I walked away from playing in college and I see his love. I'm like, oh, damn it. You're bringing me back, dude. This is awesome. So yeah, Instagram, website, book on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the spots. And, yeah, thank you again. I know we met and I knew who you were before we met. I've been familiar with your work for a long time. So anytime people I've been familiar with or people I've read and people who have given so much longer than me become peers, become people I can converse with, I find that to be very special. So I'm thankful for this time.
Wonderful. It's been a lovely interview. I've really enjoyed it. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Christine.
In today's episode of Liturgical Rebels, I was in conversation with Kevin Sweeney, who shared his transformative journey from a conservative Christian background to a more progressive and radical perspective. We discussed the significance of the Black prophetic tradition in shaping his faith and the importance of understanding the cosmic Christ as a universal force. The conversation also delved into the role of the concrete Jesus in calling believers to action and the limitations of traditional creeds in addressing love, justice, and liberation. In this conversation, Kevin and I also explored the significance of embodiment in faith, the limitation of creeds, the transformative power of mysticism, and the practical implications of living out spiritual principles. We discussed how the creeds can create a disconnect between belief and action, and how the teachings of the mystics can guide individuals towards a more experiential understanding of God. The conversation emphasized the importance of love, community, and personal transformation in the journey of faith. In the next episode of Liturgical Rebels, I will be in conversation with another contemplative, Ian Mobsby. who became a Christian through the alternative worship and emerging church movements in the UK in the 1990s from a lefty atheist background. And he never felt that he quite fitted into traditional church. Since then, he has been ordained as a missioner, pioneer, practitioner, particularly with missional forms of new monastic communities and the renewal of parishes as mixed ecology contexts of the experimental alongside the traditional. As part of this, Ian has developed a deep contemplative Christian faith and practice. He has lectured and spoken around various parts of the Anglican community in the USA, Canada, UK, Europe, Australia, and New Zealand. He has written a number of books on aspects of contemporary mission and spirituality, and recently completed a research PhD exploration of spiritual but not religious, which gave rise to his most recent book, The Seeking Heart, a contemplative approach to mission, pioneering, published in January 2025. I am Christine Sine, the author of Celtic Advent, Following an Unfamiliar Path, and also of The Gift of Wonder. My other books include Digging Deeper, The Art of Contemplative Gardening, and To Garden with God. I also write regularly on Substack. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the podcast. Please also share it with your friends or join me on Substack, Instagram, or Facebook.